The night sky over the Russian city erupted in chaos as an enormous fireball swallowed the horizon. What began as a precise Ukrainian strike quickly turned into one of the most devastating explosions of the war. Flames reached hundreds of feet into the air. Shockwaves shattered windows miles away, and residents were left in panic as the ground trembled beneath them. It was not just another military target being destroyed. It was a clear and deliberate blow against one of Russia's most heavily stocked ammunition depots. The result was not only the destruction of weapons, but also widespread damage to the very city meant to be protected by them. This strike carried a weight far beyond its immediate destruction, shaking both the battlefield and the confidence of those watching across the world. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into this extraordinary event, unpacking every detail from what happened inside the depot to the way this strike reshaped the perception of the war. Ukraine has carried out many operations over the last year, but this one stood out for its timing, its scale, and its psychological impact. When the depot went up in flames, it wasn't just about the weapons lost. It was about the vulnerability it exposed, the fear it planted, and the signal it sent to both sides of the conflict. From the outside, the destruction was catastrophic. Entire blocks near the site looked as if a natural disaster had struck. Eyewitness videos captured walls collapsing, cars thrown across streets, and thick black smoke blotting out the stars. The sheer force of the explosions made it feel less like a single strike and more like a chain of earthquakes detonating one after another. Windows across the city shattered, leaving families scrambling to protect themselves from flying glass. Sirens wailed through the night, and emergency services rushed to neighborhoods that had no warning that such devastation was coming. People described the blast as louder than anything they had ever heard in their lives, a roar that continued for hours as secondary explosions kept tearing through the depot. Inside the depot, conditions were even worse. Ammunition stacked in unsafe quantities created a deadly domino effect. Every explosion triggered another, with shells, rockets, and fuel tanks going up in bursts of fire and thunder. Storage facilities designed to hold weapons securely instead turned into amplifiers of destruction. Firefighters and rescue crews could barely approach, as each time they got close, another detonation sent debris raining down. The heat was unbearable, melting metal, destroying concrete, and making the entire facility collapse from within. It was total annihilation, the kind of destruction no depot could recover from. For Russia, this wasn't just a loss of supplies, it was the erasure of an entire strategic hub. The performance of the strike itself revealed something significant about Ukraine's evolving capabilities. Analysts believe advanced long-range precision weapons, possibly supplied by Western allies, were used to execute the attack. These weapons were designed to bypass Russian air defenses, penetrate deep into hostile territory, and hit their targets with extraordinary accuracy. The depot wasn't simply damaged, it was obliterated. A strike of this scale demonstrated that Ukraine could not only reach into Russian-held territory, but do so in ways that left little chance for interception. This showed a sharp improvement in Ukraine's battlefield performance, sending a warning to Russia that even its strongest fortifications were no longer beyond reach. The strike also exposed critical flaws in Russia's safety measures. Ammunition depots are supposed to be heavily secured and carefully managed, yet this one became a perfect recipe for disaster. By overloading the facility with munitions and ignoring modern safety protocols, Russian forces unintentionally set the stage for the catastrophe. When the first missile hit, the lack of compartmentalization meant that the entire depot went up in a chain reaction. What should have been a fortress of supplies turned into a bomb waiting to go off, and when it did, the damage stretched far beyond military losses. Civilian neighborhoods bore the brunt of Russia's negligence. making the destruction not just a military failure, but also a humanitarian one. The uniqueness of this strike cannot be overstated. It was not just the size of the blast, but the message it carried. Ukraine has shown before that it can strike with precision, but this event symbolized something more: psychological dominance. For residents of Russian cities who once believed they were insulated from the direct consequences of the war, this attack shattered that illusion. Suddenly, areas thought to be safe found themselves within reach of Ukrainian firepower. That fear spreads quickly, undermining morale and forcing the Russian government to answer uncomfortable questions. For Ukraine, it was proof of resilience, ingenuity, and the ability to fight back even when the odds appear stacked against them. As the flames burned and the smoke lingered, Russia was left counting its losses. Not only were millions of dollars in ammunition destroyed, but the damage to infrastructure and housing added another layer of financial cost. Streets had to be cleared, homes rebuilt, and public services restored in the aftermath of devastation. The price of negligence and overconfidence proved far greater than the cost of the weapons themselves. In one strike, Ukraine forced Russia to pay a steep toll in both resources and reputation. The strike on the ammunition depot did more than destroy physical assets. It created ripple effects across the battlefield and in the halls of political power. Russian forces, already stretched thin by months of grinding conflict, suddenly faced an unexpected shortage of supplies. Ammunition is the lifeblood of war, and losing such a massive stockpile overnight meant their ability to continue heavy bombardments was immediately compromised. Commanders who had grown accustomed to firing indiscriminately now had to calculate their every move, unsure if the next delivery of shells would arrive in time. For Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines, this meant breathing room, fewer barrages to endure, and an opportunity to regain momentum in areas where Russian firepower had previously dominated. The performance of the strike also spoke volumes to international observers. Allies watching from the sidelines saw Ukraine's capability as proof that their support was paying off. Western precision systems were not just symbolic gestures, they were delivering real results that reshaped the battlefield. Military analysts across Europe and the United States pointed to the strike as evidence that advanced weapons in the hands of a determined force could turn the tide of war. This event gave fresh arguments to those pushing for even greater support, as it showed Ukraine was not only willing, but also able to use advanced tools effectively. Every successful operation like this builds momentum in international diplomacy, strengthening Ukraine's case for continued aid. Meanwhile, for Russia, the strike raised pressing questions about its defensive infrastructure. How could a facility so crucial be hit so effectively? Were their air defense systems asleep, overwhelmed, or simply incapable of stopping such advanced weaponry? Citizens began asking the same questions, and public trust in the government's ability to protect them continued to erode. State media attempted to spin the event as a minor incident, but footage from residents showing massive fireballs, deafening blasts, and widespread damage made denial impossible. The contrast between official statements and undeniable reality widened the gap between government narratives and people's lived experiences, fueling resentment and fear. Safety, or rather the lack of it, became another point of focus. Russia's storage of weapons in such close proximity to civilian areas highlighted negligence on a shocking scale. Instead of isolating dangerous stockpiles far from populated zones, authorities had allowed them to grow unchecked inside the city's boundaries. When disaster struck, it wasn't just soldiers who paid the price. It was families, children, and ordinary people who suddenly found themselves in the middle of a war zone. The human toll of this miscalculation was enormous. Entire neighborhoods were damaged, homes reduced to rubble, and countless lives turned upside down overnight. It was a stark reminder that in this war, the line between military and civilian suffering is razor thin. Beyond the physical destruction, the psychological warfare was just as potent. For Ukrainians, this strike was a morale booster, a reminder that even against a larger and heavily armed adversary, victories were possible. Every explosion in that Russian city echoed across Ukraine as a symbol of resistance and defiance. Soldiers felt emboldened, civilians felt reassured, and the government gained fresh proof that its strategies were working. On the other hand, Russian citizens confronted a harsh reality. The war, which for many had felt distant, suddenly arrived at their doorstep with fire and fury. Fear of more strikes, questions about safety, and doubts about leadership began spreading like wildfire. Fear is a powerful force, and this strike planted it deep inside Russian society. The cost of the attack for Russia could not simply be measured in money or weapons. It was a multidimensional loss, strategic, economic, and emotional. Financially, rebuilding damaged neighborhoods and replenishing lost supplies would require vast resources at a time when sanctions were already tightening the screws on Moscow's economy. Strategically, the loss of a major depot weakened their military operations in the region, reducing their ability to project power. Emotionally, the shock of seeing one of their own cities suffer such devastation undermined the narrative of control and strength the Kremlin had carefully cultivated. It revealed vulnerability, and in war, vulnerability can be as dangerous as any weapon. As global audiences watched footage of the explosions spreading online, the strike also reshaped the way the world saw the conflict. For many, it highlighted Ukraine's determination and ingenuity against the odds, against a larger adversary. Ukraine continued to find ways to strike back decisively. This captured attention not only in allied countries, but also in neutral nations observing from afar. It proved that Ukraine was not a passive recipient of aid, but an active, capable force rewriting the story of the war in real time. In conflicts, perception often matters as much as reality, and this strike dramatically shifted both. The aftermath in the Russian city told its own story. Streets were littered with debris, residents lined up for emergency aid, and children stared at burned-out shells of buildings they once called home. Firefighters worked tirelessly, but each flare-up reminded them of the dangers that lingered even after the explosion ceased. For days, smoke hovered above the city like a haunting reminder of what had happened. Life would eventually return, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain long after the flames died down. People would remember the night the sky turned to fire, and with that memory came a sense of uncertainty that no government reassurance could erase. The story of this strike would not be complete without examining the broader consequences it carried for both nations. For Ukraine, it was a moment of validation, showing that months of training, coordination, and reliance on advanced systems could produce results that mattered not just tactically, but strategically. It proved to the Ukrainian people and to their international allies that resilience and ingenuity were more than slogans. They were the engines driving real outcomes on the battlefield. Each time Ukraine demonstrates that it can deliver such precise and devastating blows, the narrative of the conflict shifts further away from inevitability and closer to possibility. Possibility that the underdog can resist, possibility that a smaller nation can withstand aggression, and possibility that determination can reshape even the most unequal battles. The psychological component of the strike also reached deep into Russia's military ranks. Soldiers who had once felt secure behind massive stockpiles suddenly faced the reality that those very stockpiles could become their greatest vulnerabilities. Imagine the fear of guarding a facility filled with explosives, knowing that a single incoming missile could ignite an inferno that would consume everything. That sense of vulnerability gnaws at morale, creating cracks in discipline and confidence. For every Russian soldier who saw the footage of the destroyed depot, there was an unspoken question: if that depot could be destroyed, what about the one I'm guarding right now? The psychological erosion of confidence in supply lines is an invisible yet powerful weapon. The strike also highlighted how the nature of warfare has evolved. In previous generations, battles were defined by manpower, tanks, and artillery barrages that stretched for miles. Today, precision and intelligence have become just as important as brute force. Ukraine's ability to identify, target, and obliterate a key depot miles behind enemy lines underscores the role of technology and coordination in modern war. It isn't always about who has the most soldiers or the heaviest guns. It's about who can strike smarter, faster, and with greater accuracy. This shift is rewriting the playbook of the conflict, giving Ukraine tools to offset the numerical advantages of its adversary. Economically, the cost of rebuilding the affected Russian city will weigh heavily. In addition to replacing the destroyed munitions, authorities must now address damaged infrastructure, hospitals, schools, and homes. Insurance systems are overwhelmed, emergency funds are strained, and the government faces the double challenge of financing its war effort while tending to its own wounded communities. Each ruble spent on recovery is a ruble not spent on the battlefield, and this balance creates tension within the system. Meanwhile, sanctions and international isolation reduce the ability to easily replenish supplies, meaning every loss becomes more painful, more noticeable, and more difficult to cover. From Ukraine's perspective, the strike was executed at a fraction of the cost compared to the damage it inflicted. One precision missile, perhaps a fraction of $1 million, destroyed weapons worth many times that, along with forcing Russia into costly rebuilding projects. The price-to-impact ratio heavily favored Ukraine, making the strike not only militarily effective, but also economically efficient. In a war where resources are stretched thin, efficiency is everything. Each operation must carry weight, and in this case, the payoff was immense. The human side of the story is equally significant. For Ukrainians, images of the burning Russian city provided a sense of justice, a belief that the suffering they endured daily was finally mirrored across enemy lines. Families who had lost loved ones to Russian shelling watched the footage with a mix of sorrow and vindication. It was not joy at civilian suffering, but rather a sense that balance, however imperfect, was being restored. For Russians living in the affected city, however, it was a brutal awakening. The war they had watched from a distance had now crossed into their lives, bringing destruction, fear, and grief directly to their doorsteps. These contrasting experiences deepened the divide between the two societies, fueling anger on one side and resilience on the other. Internationally, the strike made headlines across the globe. Governments, analysts, and citizens everywhere debated its implications. Some saw it as a dangerous escalation, proof that the conflict could spill deeper into Russian territory with unpredictable consequences. Others saw it as a necessary step, a demonstration that aggression would not go unanswered. Regardless of interpretation, one truth remained constant: the world was watching closely, and Ukraine had captured attention once again. Every explosion reverberated not just through Russian soil, but across international airwaves, ensuring the strike would be remembered as a pivotal moment. As the smoke cleared and recovery efforts continued, both nations found themselves standing at new crossroads. For Russia, the challenge was not only to replace lost ammunition, but also to reassure a shaken population and restore confidence in its defenses. For Ukraine, the challenge was to maintain momentum, build on the success, and continue demonstrating that precision and resilience could turn the tide of war. Both sides walked away altered, and the battlefield itself seemed to shift beneath their feet. In the end, this strike was more than a military operation. It was a statement. it declared that Ukraine's fight was far from over, that its capacity to resist remained strong, and that even the mightiest stockpiles could be reduced to ash in a single night. It declared that war is not only about numbers and size, but about strategy, willpower, and the ability to strike when it matters most. And most of all, it declared that no city, no depot, and no force is beyond the reach of consequences in a conflict defined by determination and survival. The night the depot exploded, the war itself seemed to shift, leaving a message written in fire across the Russian sky: vulnerability is universal and resilience is unstoppable.